I copied the clouds that I did in my other scene. I just copied them in, so you can sort of see them here. You guys can have a rummage through the scene and just take a look at sort of where I place these. But I haven't done anything special. Like I said, I put a volume behind this baobab tree to sort of make it stand out a little bit better. So here, and that's just creating a little bit of contrast, making this tree pop. I added sort of a volume, or moved the cloud so it's sort of intersecting with this tree, and you get some really nice interaction with the leaves and the bark there, which is nice. Just sort of scattered a cloud to the right. You know, just adds a little bit more contrast there and shape. Added sort of like a cloud at the back as well. So let's take a look at render settings and getting this shot exported. I'm going to dive into the ROPNet, and we're going to go to the output tab. Where it says common file prefix, we need to specify where we want to save this image out to. $job images. I usually save this in a folder called Redshift, and I'll call this something like atmospheric env underscore, I don't know, v1, and I'm going to end that with .exr. So if you're rendering out a sequence, then you need to make sure you're using the $f expression with a frame padding of either 2, 3, or 4. So 2, 3, or 4. I usually go with something like 3, so $f3. But that's only if you're rendering multiple frames. So in this case, we're just going to render one frame. So atmospheric underscore environment underscore v1.exr. We can leave all these settings as is. We're going to turn render to mplay off. I never use that option. I always use this render to disk option. I'm going to set the samples pretty high, something like 128 by maybe something like 256, which results in, I think, about a 2.5 to 3 minute render. And this also depends on what type of hardware you're running as well. So just bear that in mind. We're going to go over to the motion blur tab, enable motion blur because our camera is moving. If you're rendering out a still frame, you can disable this. That's absolutely fine. I'm going to go to the optimizations tab, and we don't need any refraction. We're not using refractive materials. I'm going to set the combined to 4. We're going to go to global illumination. I'm going to turn the number of bounces down to 2, and that will just make the render a little bit faster. We're going to go over to output now, and we're going to go to the AOVs. So all I did with this is that I rendered everything together because I kind of knew that all I need to do with this shot is just grade it. If you needed to break the elements down, then you could create additional ROPs, you know, one for the trees, one for the volume, and so on. But all we're going to need for this is one AOV, and that is the Z depth. Under the common, I'm going to make sure this says half float 16 bits. You can change that to 32 if you need to. We're going to change the depth mode to Z normalized. So we're fitting that Z depth between 0 and 1, and you'll see that in Nuke later on. So all those other settings can be left as is. I wouldn't use denoise in the render engine. I tend to use denoise using the Neat Video reduce noise plugin. I find it's a lot better. Just going to check over some other settings, make sure they're all looking okay. We're going to go to the global overrides tab, and we're going to disable subsurface scattering, turn that off. Turn emission off, we don't need that. Turn refractions off and turn that off as well. So we've only got 3 on there, or 2 on there, sorry. Let's go to the main tab. We're going to input our animated camera. Going to make sure the override camera resolution is off. I'm going to go back out and we're going to adjust the settings on this render cam animated. So the resolution is 1920 by 770. We have a 24mm focal length. I'm going to turn off post effects, so you can just disable that. Although if none of these are turned on, it shouldn't make any difference. You can also go in on the cog and just make sure they're turned off there. But just make sure that you've got the view transform set to sRGB aces. So whatever is set in here in this Redshift render view will get pulled into the render settings and rendered out. So let's go back to the ROPNet and we're going to hit render to disk. I'm going to go to my task manager and we're just going to wait for that to load a moment. So you can see here that the my graphics cards have spiked, and this second GPU is using 8.3 gig of RAM, and the first GPU is using 10.4. This third GPU I turn off just to avoid any crashes. So another thing to mention is if you render to disk, if you're rendering a single frame, unfortunately, you don't get a dialog box showing your progress, which is kind of annoying. So I just check the progress here, and as soon as this dips off, then I know the render's done. Another way you can check this is by going to the Redshift render folder. I'm just going to pull that up. Images, Redshift. And currently there's a EXR lock file in there. So once the render's finished, this EXR lock file will disappear and the rendered EXR will appear. If you're rendering multiple frames, then you take this render frame range, and if you hit render to disk, you get a cool dialog box come up showing your progress, which is nice. Another thing that you want to do is enable this real-time toggle if you're messing around animating cameras and stuff. I'm also going to click this box here, and you'd want to set your frame range to something like 120 frames. Another thing that I did in this scene that you can check out is that I just translated these clouds over to the side. So I've got my animated camera there, which is just doing a really simple move in. It's very, very basic, nothing special. And on each of these clouds, I've just translated the cloud. So I'm just going to hide these. I've just translated the cloud to the left. I did the same with, I don't know whether I did it with these ones. I didn't. But you could also add some movement with these. So what you do is you go to the transform tab. I'd alt click on the translation there, move forward to frame 120 for example, move this, and I'd alt click again. So then we'd be getting movement in that cloud, and that's pretty much it. But just remember that you want to move the clouds by the same distance. So for example, if I started moving clouds in the background from somewhere like here to here in the space of 120 frames, then we're going to ruin the scale of the scene. So things that are in the background appear to be moving slower, and that's just because they're further away. So that just looks really weird, and it'll make the scene look really small. So just bear that in mind. So I'm just going to wait for that render to finish, and then I'll speak to you guys then.